January 12th to order. Appreciate all of you being here on a pro forma day. First item on the agenda is bill introductions. I know we have the honor of having the state treasurer here. Mr. Treasurer, if you'd want to come up and request your bill.
Good morning. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. Our office requests the introduction of RS 2579. It's a bill to enhance and increase the availability of the ABLE accounts. In the past, you've been able to open those if you're a conservator or a guardian, but due to new IRS regulations that were put together last November during the Trump administration, they expanded who could do that, and we need to have state law match that. So we'd love to have that introduced and supported here in this committee. So,
thank you, Treasurer. Are there any objections to that bill introduction? I see none. It will be introduced by consensus. Thank you
very much.
Just to put on your calendar, I do plan on hearing that bill next Wednesday.
Okay, we will make sure we're ready. So thank you.
Great.
Thanks.
Thank you. Committee, the next item on the agenda is a presentation and an overview of the Kansas credit unions. We're going to start off with Vicki Hurt, who is the administrator for the Kansas Department of Credit Unions. Vicki, welcome to the committee.
Thank you. Well, Senator Longbine, excuse me, and committee, thank you for the opportunity to provide you a briefing on the Kansas Department of Credit Unions this morning. I'm Vicki Hurt, and I am the administrator for the Kansas Department of Credit Unions, and my appointment actually expired at the end of the year, but I will serve until the new person is appointed, which should be probably in the next month or so, whenever that committee meets and makes those appointments. I just wanted to tell you a little bit about the department this morning. I'm sure a lot of you know a lot about credit unions and a lot about our department, but just a little review. I provide you with our mission statement, which is basically to protect the Kansas citizens from undue risk by ensuring safe and sound operations of state-chartered credit unions. And then our philosophy, I think, is really the more important one, which is in accordance with the highest standards of fairness, accountability, efficiency, honesty, and integrity. But we affirm that the funds deposited in Kansas chartered credit unions shall be protected to the best of our abilities. And that's really what our department is there for, is to protect the Kansas citizens and their deposits in Kansas credit unions. And we take that very seriously. I'm sure, as most of you know, credit unions are not-for-profit member financial cooperatives, very similar to farm co-ops or electric co-ops, and our structures are very, very much the same. Our credit union boards and committees are elected by our membership and serve as unpaid volunteers. And Kansas law does require that all credit unions carry the National Credit Union Share Insurance Fund to ensure that members' deposits up to $250,000, and that's very similar to FDIC insurance that the banks have, and it's structured basically the same. The first Kansas credit union was chartered in 1929. And it was chartered at that time to serve postal and civil service employees, and that credit union actually still exists today. It used to be called the Postal Credit Union, and now it's called First Kansas Credit Union. Took me a while to realize First Kansas Credit Union meant it was the first Kansas credit union. So I think that's pretty unique that that credit union that was chartered in 1929 still exists today. And our department, the Kansas Department of Credit Unions, was actually created in 1968, and that gave us, at that time, a dual charter system with the FDIC and a federal charter for credit unions and a state charter for credit unions, and we've always been very proud to have that charter. Our department is accredited through the National Association of State Chartered Credit Unions, and it has been since 1995, and we actually just went through that accreditation last month, and it's a very lengthy accreditation. But it's nice to have that outside confirmation that we are doing what our department should be doing. And they review exams and look at timeframes, and they interview all of our staff. They also interview other departments that we work with within the state, like IT, HR, budget, Attorney General's office. So it's a pretty lengthy accreditation process that we go through, and we go through that every 5 years. Our budget is, we're 100% fee-funded department, and that is a formula that's been used for years. We do have the ability to adjust it as needed for what the needs of the department are, but it's worked very well for us, and that should say our revenue for the 2022 budget was 1.1 million, and then the budget was 1.275, but we have some carryover from previous years. So we use that within that budget. And our largest portion by far is for salaries and travel, because that's what our examiners do, is a lot of travel. Then we contribute the $100,000 to the state general fund every year. And 50% of our budget year has elapsed, and 42% of our budget has been spent this year. And that's down a little bit just because of the situation with traveling and going to credit unions to do exams. We have 12 budgeted positions, and we currently have 2 open examiner positions. We have one that will start February 7th, I believe, and then I'm interviewing 2 tomorrow. So it's like all of you are aware, and every other department, it's not easy to get staffing. But I feel good that we've had a few to interview. It's taken us a few months, but we're getting there. So hopefully something will come out of tomorrow's and we'll be fully staffed again. We are doing hybrid exams, which we were doing remote exams for over a year. In July, we started doing hybrid exams, which in the past we used to send numerous examiners to each credit union for an exam. And now with the hybrid exams, what we're going to do is just send probably 2 examiners and then do the rest of it remotely, since we've learned how to do remote exams. And that seems to be working pretty well. It will depend on the credit union and their size and their issues, if they're having issues and things, how many people will actually send. But hopefully that will help us retain examiners so they won't be having to do as much traveling and things as they have in the past. The Kansas law requires that we examine every credit union at least once every 18 months, and our average is about 15 months. And we did complete, in 2021, we completed 49 exams with 9 follow-up contacts. So we kept them pretty busy. Our exams are financial risk exams, and I listed out there for you what the areas that we look at: capital, asset quality management, earnings, asset liability management. And each one of those areas is given a rating of 1 to 5. And then there's a composite rating at the end that kind of tells us the condition of the credit union and where they're at. And we have 6.1 billion in assets in our Kansas chartered credit unions, and 96% of those assets have a composite rating of 1 or 2. So I consider that very strong. And then I just listed out the risk areas that we look at, and then those combine back to the composite ratings. And the credit risk is just default on loans. Interest rate risk is any changes in the market rates. How are the credit unions going to adjust to those? Do they have the ability to do that? Liquidity risk is the inability to fund their obligations. Do they have the money to fund loans? Transaction risk is fraud. We look, of course, at that all the time. And that's why we require the segregation of duties all the time. Sometimes that's difficult because we have very small credit unions. Strategic risk, do they have well-conceived business plans? Do they have business plans at all? Are they following those business plans? And then reputation risk is what kind of opinion, public opinion they have. And then just a few numbers for you. We have 74 credit unions in Kansas. We have, and these are as of 9/30 because the year-end numbers aren't out yet. We have 55 state chartered credit unions and 55 state chartered, 19 federal chartered. And then you can tell 74% of our credit unions are state chartered credit unions, which is a high percentage rate when you look around the country. We have a good portion of ours are state chartered, and that has a lot to do because of our statutes. We have really good statutes in Kansas for our credit unions. We have one corporate credit union, Millennium Corporate, out of Wichita, and they serve credit unions in Kansas, Missouri, Nebraska, and Montana. And as I said, these were 9/30 numbers. We did have 2 credit unions that merged as of year end. So we actually have 53 credit unions going forward after year end. The largest credit union we have is Credit Union out of America, which is out of Wichita, and that's the largest state chartered credit union. There is one larger federal credit union, but that's 1.6 billion. And then our smallest credit union is out of St. Francis, Kansas, out west, 131,000. We have a lot of small credit unions too. Total assets are, like I said, was 6.1 billion. Those have increased year to date as of 9/30 about 10%. And our previous year's increase was about 16%. So in the last year and 3 quarters, our assets have increased about 25%. And that's primarily due to stimulus money coming in and then sitting there. So the number of credit unions, we have 11 credit unions that are over 100 million, 7 credit unions 50 to 100 million, and then 19 credit unions that are 10 to 50 million, and 18 credit unions that are below 10 million. So predominantly, we have 37 of our credit unions that are below 50 million. So we have a lot of small credit unions around the state, and they do a very good job of serving our members. The average credit union then is about 110 million, and if you look at the median, it's about 26 million. And I just listed the net worth of those different groups and also the national peer numbers. And as you can tell, we're right at or above national peers in our net worth, which is very good. Actually, all of our numbers are very much mere national peers or a little bit better. Our loans to assets, 70%, which just means that we loan out 70% of the deposits that we have. Our earnings through 9/30 were 81 basis points or 86 basis points. Our delinquency is 47 basis points, which is down considerably than a few years ago. And that's actually quite a bit lower than the national average. Overall, I think credit unions are doing well financially, and we're pleased with what we see most of the time. So I want to thank you again for the opportunity to tell you a little bit about our department and about credit unions. And if you have any questions, I'm more than glad to answer them. And if not, you have my contact information.
Vicki, thank you very much for a very thorough presentation. I'll open it up to questions, but I have one first.
Sure.
In my discussions on the other side, particularly with banks, I know they are experiencing right now all-time liquidity records. Seems to be a lot of liquidity in banks, and loan volume seems to be going down, which is affecting capital ratios. Are you seeing that in the credit unions?
We're seeing some of that. Our loan volume actually in our Well, 70% loan to assets. So it's stable. We've seen some credit unions struggling, especially smaller credit unions. They're the ones that really seem to struggle the most with it. Mostly what's hurting the net worth ratios is the large deposits. Just the deposits have increased 25% in the last year and 3 quarters. And it's hard to loan out an additional 25% of assets. So it's really the asset growth that's hurting the net worth. So we're seeing that some. I don't know if we're seeing it as much as the bankers are. I don't watch their numbers as closely, but we're seeing it some.
Are you seeing decreased capital ratios because of the liquidity?
No, we're not seeing increased capital ratios, no.
Decreased capital?
Decreased. Yes, some, but not dramatically.
Okay.
We're seeing them certainly go down, but luckily we have had such strong capital ratios that has helped us withstand that increase in assets.
Okay, very good. Committee, are there additional questions? I see none. Vicki, thank you very much.
Sure.
Next, we will turn our attention to Stephanie Mulholland, who is the Director of Legislative and Political Affairs for the Heartland Credit Union Association. Stephanie, welcome to the committee.
Good morning. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's good to see everyone and to be here. I appreciate the opportunity. I am Stephanie Mulholland. I'm here on behalf of Heartland Credit Union Association. We represent the 74 credit unions that are operating in Kansas and the roughly 676,000 Kansans who belong to one of those credit unions. I did want to note that the department's numbers cover the 55 state chartered credit unions. The numbers you see in my report also include the 19 federally chartered credit unions that are headquartered here in the state. Vicki already touched on this, and I know many of you have heard this several times, but if you're new to credit unions, I'll just point out that we are not-for-profit financial co-ops, like Vicki said, like your ag and electric co-ops. Under that cooperative structure, that means we operate a little bit differently than for-profit institutions, the biggest distinction being our not-for-profit mission. So there are no stockholders in a credit union. When those profits are paid out, they're paid out to each member of the credit union. So last year, Kansas credit unions returned a little over $100 million to Kansans. Those profits can be paid out in a few ways, either by increasing their return on their savings accounts, reducing the loan rates, lowering fees for services, or in some cases that may be direct dividend checks back to the members. Another difference that Vicki also pointed out is that credit unions are governed by a volunteer board of directors. Those are members of the credit union elected by the members, and they don't receive compensation for that service. The credit unions have been an option for Kansas consumers for about 100 years now. We started forming them in Kansas back in 1929 on the verge of the Great Depression, when people found they were unable to access financing from traditional sources. So to address that, people pooled their money together, formed credit unions to create lending opportunities for each other. So that largely happened among groups of Kansans who worked together, worked in the same industry, or maybe went to church together, which is why to this day you'll see that even though most credit unions serve their communities as a whole, they tend to be centered around a specific employer or a specific community group. So Meritrust, which is in Wichita, they were the credit union formed by Boeing employees, now Spirit employees. Norwesco, which Vicki mentioned, in St. Francis, was started by the ag producers at the local co-op, and they're still there at the co-op. Topeka police officers have a credit union a few blocks from here inside the police station. Active military families and veterans have a credit union on each of the state's military bases, and several of the Catholic churches in the state have a credit union to serve their parishioners. In terms of market share, credit unions are a small but mighty segment of the market. We hold roughly 7% of deposits in Kansas. That's a percentage that's remained relatively steady for decades. Though we have a relatively small share, we know that we play a big role in a number of Kansans' lives, whether that's filling the gap because they've been unable to obtain financing elsewhere, or whether that's helping to drive competition and consumer choice in the market. I did list in my testimony some of the ways we've helped fill that gap, particularly for small and middle income Kansans over the past year, but I wanted to draw your attention to those. We made loans to over 89,000 Kansans who have a credit score of 640 or less. We made nearly 39,000 small dollar loans to help Kansans bridge the gap between paychecks. We paid over $30 million in taxes. We provided nearly 65,000 Kansans with free financial and debt counseling, as well as the financial literacy training that credit unions do in schools. And we offered more than 51,000 skipped loan payments or loan deferments to help Kansans overcome a temporary hardship without having their credit score negatively affected in the process. I wanted to close by talking about some of the challenges or barriers that we see for the industry going forward. Certainly, charter loss is one of the issues at the top of that list. Vicki mentioned how we have 2 mergers that came at the end of the year. Over time, Kansas has lost more than 248 credit union charters. Largely, that's been due to the cost of compliance with federal regulation. So in those cases, in most of those cases, credit unions have, the members have voted to merge with another credit union in order to shoulder the cost of those compliance costs. Another issue facing credit unions are some of the outdated market restrictions that continue to be on the books. This committee and the legislature, I know, worked very hard over the past couple years to successfully amend the state's field of membership law. And I know our members will be here in a couple weeks to thank you in person, but wanted to say thank you for that. On behalf of all of us, we really appreciate that change and the work you did to make it happen. Some of the other restrictions that continue to prevent consumer access are what's called the Federal Member Business Lending Law that caps credit unions in our ability to lend to ag or small businesses. We're seeing other states are starting to pass legislation to exempt credit unions from that federal barrier so that more ag producers and business owners have options in the marketplace. Kansas is also one of the remaining states that has a public funds restriction. That means Kansas law does not allow cities, counties, or schools to deposit in their local credit union, even in cases where the teachers working at the school might have a credit union or the city employees at the fire station might have a credit union that could hold those deposits. And then finally, one-size-fits-all federal regulation you hear a lot about. That certainly continues to be a challenge. And then staffing shortages, like most Kansas employers, we're seeing staffing shortages and trying to address that. We do appreciate initiatives like the Kansas Promise Act that we think will help all of us address those workforce gaps over time. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I'll wrap up and happy to take questions.
Stephanie, thank you very much. Committee, other questions? Senator Pittman.
Thank you, Stephanie. Always great to have you here. 2 questions. One, you mentioned the mergers of the small credit unions. It seems to me like that's not always a bad thing. If we have a bunch of small, 130,000 in asset type folks, it seems like it's not a bad thing for them to merge with other ones. I mean, we see a loss in a number of credit unions, but they might be more solid and their assets might be better distributed. Is that not the case?
I think that can definitely be true. I think they find that they can serve their members better sometimes when they can shoulder those compliance costs together and you know, just weather changes in the market. And when it comes to technology, you know, consumers want more in terms of mobile access, especially through COVID. People wanted to be able to do business virtually. And so some of those mergers have helped those small credit unions that couldn't afford to have that technology on their own to be able to afford it together.
The other question, just kind of out of the blue, I know, but we look at lending and short-term lending, and you mentioned in your testimony that the credit unions have stepped up to help loan to folks that maybe have a credit score less than 640. We might think of those as shorter-term loan, and you know, obviously it's a topic of discussion each year. Do the credit unions have policies around the rates that they charge those higher risk consumers or their members, and what do those look like? Do you have any ideas?
So I can pull some of those for you, and Vicki may be able to speak to what regulation allows. Certainly those rates are based on risk, and those tend to be higher risk loans. But I think you'll find that they're significantly lower than what you might find at other places in the market.
It'd be really great to see some information just on what the credit unions offer to those particular.
Absolutely. I'll get that for you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Committee, are there additional questions? Senator Gossage.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for being here. I'm trying to understand the difference as far as nonprofit You and I have talked many times, and I have my mortgage through a credit union. I belong to a credit union, teachers' credit union, since I first became a teacher. But then you see like the big community Americas, and they don't really seem like they fit with the little small credit unions. Can you address that?
I think definitely we've talked about the mergers and how people have pooled together in order to shoulder some of those costs. Those larger credit unions are definitely an example of that. A lot of them may have gotten their start originally with employers that were pretty large. So Community America has roots with TWA employees, as well as with Advent Health and a number of other large employers. I think that's a reflection of the employers that pooled together in mergers over time. But at the end of the day, no matter how large they are, the not-for-profit corporate structure is still there. The not-for-profit mission is still there. The profits have to be returned to the members, or the members may vote, or the board may vote to put some of those profits back into the community in ways that they think will drive the local economy. So at the end of the day, their corporate structure is the same. There's no one on the back end that's profiting off that credit union regardless of size. Everybody is sharing in the profits like they would no matter the size of the credit union.
Additional questions? See none. Thank you, Stephanie, very much.
Thanks for having me.
Lee, I hate to put you on the spot, but could I get you to come forward and request your RBC bill just so that I can make sure that staff is not hounding me to get that done? I am not referring to you, Eileen.
Mr. Chairman, I think we were going to let her get away with that, but she called herself out. So, thank you. Mr. Chairman, I would request introduction of RS 2493. This is our annual adoption of RBC.
Committee, are there any questions or any objections to introduction of the annual RBC bill? It is complicated, it is riveting, it is exciting.
Thank you.
It'll be introduced. Thank you, Lee. Committee, that's all I have for today. Tomorrow we will have presentations from the OSBC office and the Kansas Bankers Association. So look forward to seeing you tomorrow. We're adjourned.